My sister sold the distillery on Thanksgiving morning, signed the papers before the turkey was carved, then sat across from me at our mother's cherrywood table and smiled like she'd done the family a favor. "Just be grateful you got any of it," Vivian said. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I reached under my chair and lifted my worn leather briefcase onto the table, unlatched the brass clasp. Vivian stopped chewing. Before we continue, tap subscribe and drop in the comments what time it is for you. Thank you for your support. My name is Barrett Rourke. I'm 45 years old, and for 15 years before I made bourbon, I caught forgers for the state of Vermont. The Vermont State Crime Laboratory sits in a converted government building in Waterbury, and I spent 15 years in its questioned document section analyzing ink composition, paper fibers, handwriting pressure patterns, and signature authenticity. 142 cases as expert witness. Prosecutors called me when they needed someone who could stand in front of a jury and explain why a signature was written by a different hand, a different pen, at a different time than the document claimed. I was good at it. Then my father got sick. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. He was 71 and still running the dairy operation he'd built on the same 11 acres his father had farmed before him. The barn, a post and beam structure his father raised in 1947, went quiet for the first time in half a century the week we buried him. I was 38, no wife, no kids. Nothing held me at the lab except the work itself. My father left the property to me in his will. The barn, the 11 acres, the white clapboard farmhouse where my mother Lorraine still lived, where she'd lived for 50 years. He left my sister Vivian a cash inheritance and a line I've never forgotten: "You'll always have a place here." She took it as an insult. I took the barn as an obligation. I gave my notice at the crime lab on a Tuesday, drove to the property that afternoon, and stood in the empty barn looking at milking stanchions that hadn't held a cow in 3 years, hay dust floating in the light from the loft windows. The beams overhead were hand-hewn oak, still solid after 7 decades. The stone foundation walls held the cold from 100 Vermont winters. The whole place smelled like old hay and manure, and the beams groaned when the wind leaned against the walls. I decided to build a distillery. Not because I knew anything about bourbon, because I knew chemistry. Fermentation is controlled decomposition. Distillation is applied thermodynamics. Aging is a slow-motion chemical reaction between spirit and wood. Everything I'd spent 15 years analyzing under microscopes and mass spectrometers, molecular composition, chemical signatures, the way substances change over time. 14 months of renovation. Solo. I stripped the milking infrastructure, reinforced the floor joists for the weight of copper stills, poured a concrete pad for the fermentation tanks, and ran water and gas lines from the farmhouse utilities. I drove to Kentucky and bought 3 copper pot stills from a retired distiller closing his operation, loaded them into a rented flatbed myself because I couldn't afford a shipping crew. Each still weighed 800 pounds empty. I learned to weld. I learned plumbing. I learned electrical work that wasn't up to code and had to tear it out and learn it again. My hands bled through the first 4 months. Blisters on blisters, skin cracking in the Vermont cold, calluses forming over the calluses. By spring, I couldn't straighten my fingers in the morning without running them under hot water for 5 minutes. My mother watched from her kitchen window. She never asked if I knew what I was doing. She brought me sandwiches and coffee and went back inside. The first batch was terrible. Harsh, thin, no character. I adjusted the mash bill, changed the grain ratio, experimented with barrel char levels. By the third batch, I tasted it. The oak talking to the spirit, caramel notes rising through the char. Not there yet, close enough to keep going. 3 years in, the distillery was producing 2,000 cases annually. Revenue hit $800,000. 6 employees. A tasting room I'd built from reclaimed barnwood, where I poured samples for distributors and visitors who drove 2 hours from Burlington to try small batch bourbon made by a former forensic chemist in a converted dairy barn. The story sold almost as well as the whiskey. I kept one room locked, a converted tack room at the back of the distillery, behind the aging racks. Inside, my portable gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer, a stereo microscope with digital imaging, UV light sources, chemical reagent kits. Anyone who asked, and almost nobody did, got the same answer. Quality control. Testing mash bills, barrel char profiles, fermentation byproducts. All true. Also the same equipment I'd used for 15 years to catch people who faked signatures and forged documents. I told myself I kept it for the bourbon. The business was growing, but I was drowning in invoices, tax filings, distributor contracts, payroll, and quarterly reports. I made bourbon. I didn't manage spreadsheets. I needed someone who understood money, someone I could trust with every dollar the distillery earned. Vivian had a business degree from UVM, sharp with numbers. She'd been between consulting jobs since her husband Drake's real estate career stalled. She came to the distillery one afternoon, toured the operation, and told me I was shipping to 3 distributors when 8 had called asking for allocations. She was right. I handed her the books. Full access. Checking accounts, savings, vendor payments, payroll, everything. She set up a proper accounting system within the first month, renegotiated 2 distributor contracts for better margins, and hired a bookkeeper named Darlene Foyt to handle daily receivables. I went back to making bourbon. My father never locked the barn. I asked him once why not, and he said, because the only people who'd steal from family aren't stopped by locks. I thought he was being trusting. Turns out he was right about everything, except who would do the stealing. I gave Vivian the keys because she was family. That was 3 years ago. I didn't audit a single ledger. Vivian changed the locks on the office within the first month. New filing cabinet, new computer, password-protected spreadsheets. When I asked for the quarterly numbers, she printed a 1-page summary and slid it across the tasting room bar. "You don't need the raw data," she said. "That's why you hired me." She had the degree. I had the stills. But her version of the arrangement changed fast. Within 6 months, she was calling the distillery our operation on distributor calls. At family dinners, she told whoever would listen that she kept the lights on while I played with grain. At Thanksgiving the year before, she'd taken it further. My mother at the head of the table. Sophie, Vivian and Drake's 16-year-old daughter, helping serve. The whole family gathered. "Someone has to do the real work," Vivian said to the table. "While Barrett plays alchemist in that barn, I'm managing 8 distributor relationships, payroll for 7 employees, and quarterly filings. If I stopped tomorrow, the whole thing folds in a month." I sipped my coffee, said nothing. Her husband raised his glass. Drake Cavell, commercial real estate out of Burlington. Stocky, ruddy-faced, 40 extra pounds, his expensive suits couldn't hide. Thinning hair combed across a widening scalp. Gold Rolex, heavy cologne. The kind of man who shook your hand too hard and laughed too loud at his own jokes. His career had stalled years ago, but he still dressed like he was closing seven-figure deals. "To the woman behind the curtain," Drake said. He cornered me in the tasting room the following week, helped himself to a pour of the barrel-proof without asking. "Let Viv run this thing," he said, swirling the glass. "She's got the head for it. You're the talent, she's the business. Together you two have something real. It's my distillery, Drake." "Sure, buddy, sure it is." He drained the glass and poured himself another. The bourbon was getting better. Barrel 17 was developing the kind of character that made distributors drive 2 hours for a tasting. I had my hands full with mash bills, fermentation schedules, and a honey-infused limited edition from my own beehives. Let Vivian handle the money. That was the arrangement. Vivian had created 3 companies that didn't exist. I wouldn't learn this for another 18 months. Green Mountain Barrel Supply, Northeast Grain Partners, Champlain Equipment Services. Each one had a P.O. box, a basic state registration, and a bank account she controlled through LLCs Drake had set up. Every month, invoices arrived for barrel staves, grain shipments, equipment maintenance. Every month, Vivian approved the payments. 3,000 here, 5,000 there. Too small to trigger scrutiny, too large to dismiss. Darlene noticed first. Darlene Foyt, the bookkeeper. 60 years old, bifocals on a chain, the kind of woman who reconciled her personal checkbook to the penny every Sunday night. She couldn't reach Green Mountain Barrel Supply by phone. Northeast Grain Partners had no website, no presence beyond a P.O. box in Rutland. The invoice formats from all 3 vendors used the same font, the same margins, the same date convention. She brought her concerns to Vivian. "I can't verify these vendors," Darlene said. "Phone numbers go to voicemail." "I've never seen a delivery from any of them." "Specialty suppliers," Vivian told her. "Barrett sources them. Take it up with him." "But the invoices all use identical formatting. Your job is to enter the numbers I give you and make sure payroll runs on time. If that's too complicated, I'll find someone who can handle it without the questions." Darlene stopped asking. But she started keeping notes. A blue spiral notebook she took home every night. Dated entries of every invoice she couldn't verify. Every payment that didn't match a delivery. 18 months of records, written in a schoolteacher's hand. She never brought the notebook to work. She never mentioned it to me. I learned all of this later. At the time, I was in the barn, making bourbon, trusting family. While Vivian skimmed the distillery, Drake was burning through money on a separate track. Online poker. Sports betting across 3 platforms. Weekend trips to Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun that he told Vivian were client dinners. His commissions had dried up 2 years earlier, but the losses kept growing. $290,000 over 4 years, funded first by credit cards, then a home equity line, then by something worse. Sophie had a college savings account opened the year she was born. $47,000. Built over 15 years of contributions. She spent her afternoons at my distillery learning to read a hydrometer, studying how barrel char affected a flavor profile. Natural palate. Real patience. I was thinking about bringing her on full-time after graduation. She asked me once, while we were testing samples from Barrel 17, if I thought UVM had a good fermentation science program. "You thinking about it?" I asked. "Dad says the money's there." 15 years of saving. Drake drained her account in 11 months. Small withdrawals timed around his biggest losses. Then larger ones. By the time I found the statements, the balance was $186. Sophie didn't know. Her father was stealing her future to cover poker debts. Her mother was stealing from me to cover the rest. And it still fell short. Drake's debts outpaced Vivian's skimming. The monthly take climbed 5,000, 10, 15, 20. The invoices grew larger. The formatting slipped, test, mismatched fonts, inconsistent date conventions, the kind of errors that would have taken me 30 seconds to spot if I'd been looking. But erasing nearly 300,000 in gambling losses required something bigger than phantom vendors. I pieced the rest together from bank records and corporate filings weeks later. Drake made one phone call. Athenacrest Spirits Group, a Boston conglomerate that stripped small distilleries for their brand names and barrel inventory the way a chop shop stripped stolen cars for parts. He pitched them the Rourke operation, the barn, the brand, the 11 acres, the farmhouse where my mother had lived for 50 years. He negotiated a private finder's fee for himself, $180,000, wired upon closing to an LLC registered in New Hampshire under his cousin's name. Vivian knew about 40,000 of it. Drake kept the other 140 for himself. Thanksgiving morning. The farmhouse kitchen smelled like rosemary and roasted bird, the same way it had every November. My mother sat at the head of the cherrywood table. 74 years old, white hair pinned back, hands folded in her lap. Some days she recognized everyone. Some days she called me by my father's name. Today was a good day. She'd greeted me at the door, kissed my cheek, and asked how Barrel 17 was coming along. Sophie carried the turkey on a platter that had belonged to my grandmother. She'd been at the distillery until 10 the night before, running specific gravity readings on a test batch she'd designed herself. 17 years old and already developing a palate I trusted more than most distributors. Vivian arrived 40 minutes late. Heels on hardwood. Drake 2 steps behind, sport coat straining at the buttons, hand reaching for the bourbon I'd brought before he'd taken off his coat. My mother's sister Helen sat with her son Paul and his wife. Darlene Foyt had the chair nearest the kitchen. I'd invited her without telling Vivian. She had no family in the area and nowhere else to go for the holiday. My mother said grace. Her voice was thin but clear. Drake carved the turkey with more pressure than the job required, sawing through the breast like he was settling a score. Vivian waited until everyone had food on their plates. She knew timing. I had to give her that. I have an announcement, she said. Sophie paused mid-pour with the gravy boat. Athenacrest Spirits Group signed this morning. Vivian set her fork down and looked at me across the table. The distillery, the property, the brand. Full acquisition. $2.1 million. The room went still. I've been in talks with their team for 3 months, she said. Drake brokered the deal. It's a fair price, more than fair, considering where this business was when I took over. My mother looked between us. What does that mean, Vivian? It means we're selling, Mom. The barn, the land. All of it. This land, the house too. My mother set her fork down. But I live here. We'll find you somewhere nice. Somewhere with less to worry about. Vivian didn't look at our mother when she said it. She was watching me. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't moved. Drake reached under his chair and produced a manila folder. He slid it across the cherry wood toward my plate with the satisfaction of a man presenting his closing argument. Transfer authorization and property deed, Drake said. Both signed. Clean deal, clean paperwork. Athenacrest wants to close in 30 days. I opened the folder. 2 documents. a property transfer deed for the 11 acres, the barn, and the farmhouse. A business sale authorization for the distillery's assets, inventory, and brand rights. Both bore my name at the signature line. The slant was wrong. I signed with a natural 7-degree rightward lean. Muscle memory from 15 years of initialing forensic reports at the crime lab. This signature tilted at 12, maybe 13 degrees. The pen pressure ran heavy at the start of each letter, lightening through the connections. My hand does the opposite. Ball. Light approach, heavy finish. And the crossbar on the T in Rourke looped upward. Mine has looped down since I was 16. I held the page toward the light. 2 different shades of blue on the same document. The witness line written in one ink formulation, my signature in another. Different pen, different session. The kind of detail that would take a civilian 3 years to notice and a forensic examiner 3 seconds. 15 years of catching document fraud, and she used the wrong ink. My face didn't change. 15 years of testimony had trained that response out of me. I read both pages a second time, running my thumb along the paper's edge where the pen had left its pressure impression in the fibers. Drake filled the silence. 2.1 million, Barrett. That's more than the barn clears in a decade. You take your share. Vivian takes hers. Everybody walks away set up for life. I said nothing. Turned to the notary stamp on the second page. You could at least say thank you, Vivian said. I spent 3 months putting this together while you were adjusting grain ratios. I closed the folder. Vivian pressed both palms flat on the table. Sit down, eat your turkey, and be grateful that one of us had the vision to think bigger. I looked at her. She held my eyes for 3 seconds before her look dropped to the folder in my hands. Her left hand gripped her napkin hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Sophie sat at the end of the table, the gravy boat still in her hand. Her eyes went from her mother to me and back again. The gravy boat tilted in her hand. Darlene hadn't touched her plate. She stared at the tablecloth, shoulders drawn in, hands flat beside her knife and fork. My mother reached toward me. Her fingers shook against the wood. "Barrett," she said, "this is your father's land." "I know, Mom." I slid the folder inside my coat, pushed back my chair, stood. "Barrett." Vivian's voice cracked on the second syllable. "Where are you going?" I rested my hand on my mother's shoulder for a moment. Then I walked out the kitchen door, past the porch where my father used to sit, into the November cold. The barn was dark against the tree line, 200 yards across frozen ground. No lights. The copper stills cold, the aging racks holding their weight in the dark, the oak beams carrying the same load they'd carried for 70 years. I unlocked the back room, set the folder on the lab bench next to my gas chromatograph, and pulled the chain on the desk lamp. White light on the folder. I had work to do. I cut a half-inch square from the margin near the witness line and a second from beneath my forged name. 2 samples. Same page. The chromatograph needed 40 minutes for a full composition scan. I waited in the cold, the machine humming against the silence of the barn. The machine beeped at 11,047. I pulled the printout and spread it flat on the bench. 2 spectral profiles, side by side. The witness line showed a standard commercial ballpoint, iron gallatinate base, with synthetic dye suspension common to a dozen office supply brands. My forged signature carried a different ratio. Higher dye concentration, different solvent base. A premium roller pen, the kind Vivian kept in her desk organizer at the distillery office. 2 pens, 2 sessions. No reason for a property owner to sign his name with a different instrument than the witness who signed 3 lines above on the same page at the same sitting. I photographed the printout, logged the sample numbers, dated the entry. Same chain of custody protocol I'd followed at the state lab. Habit outlasts the job that built it. Then I moved to the stereo microscope. Under 40 times magnification, the forged B in Barrett told me everything. A hesitation mark at the top of the vertical stroke. A brief pause where the pen had lifted and reset. My hand doesn't pause on the B. 15 years of signing forensic reports trained a single downstroke that connects to the A without lifting. Whoever wrote this name stopped, checked a reference, and resumed. The forger had studied the shape of my signature, but not the physics of how I write it. I spent another hour documenting every discrepancy, photographed the hesitation marks, measured pen pressure depth in the paper fibers with the microscope's digital calipers, built a comparison chart, my actual signature from 3 different documents against the forgery, 19 points of variance. The forgery was competent. For anyone who wasn't a question document examiner, it would have passed. Vivian wasn't anyone. She was my sister, and she'd forgotten what I did before I made bourbon. I locked the lab at 2 in the morning and drove to the farmhouse. My mother's light was off. I sat in the truck, engine running, heater pushing warm air against the windshield while frost crept up the glass outside. Then I called Meredith Okafor. She'd worked beside me at the State Crime Lab for 8 years before leaving to open a forensic accounting consultancy in Montpelier. 60 cases together. Bank fraud, insurance schemes, embezzlement prosecutions. Her job was tracing money that people tried to hide. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was clear despite the hour. "It's Barrett," I said. "I need your help. Family situation. Bring me everything you have." I drove to Montpelier the next morning with the forged documents, my GCMS printouts, and 3 years of quarterly summaries Vivian had given me. Meredith spread them across her conference table, 2 monitors running bank feeds, a corkboard on the wall where she pinned transaction flows with colored string. It took her 4 days. 3 shell vendors, she said, turning her screen toward me. Green Mountain Barrel Supply, Northeast Grain Partners, Champlain Equipment Services. All registered to P.O. Boxes. All paid through LLCS linked to your brother-in-law's business filings. $340,000 over 3 years. She walked me through the transaction map. Small monthly draws in the first 18 months. 3 to 5,000. Then the amounts climbed. 15,000, 20. The pace doubled in the last year. There's more. She pulled up a corporate filing from New Hampshire. Drake negotiated a finder's fee with Athenagrest for brokering the sale. $180,000. Your sister thinks the fee is $40,000. I set the printout on the table and looked out the window at the Montpelier street below. Even the co-conspirators were cheating each other. I called Darlene Foyt that evening. The distillery bookkeeper answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. "I have something," she said. Her voice was thin, a notebook. 18 months of entries. Every invoice I couldn't verify. Every vendor I couldn't reach by phone. Every payment that didn't match a delivery. "Why didn't you come to me?" She said she'd fire me. "I'm 60 years old, Barrett. I can't start over." A pause. But I couldn't stop writing it down. She brought the notebook to the distillery the next morning. I read every page while she sat across from me in the tasting room, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, not speaking. It took a week to put it all together. I formatted my findings the same way I prepared testimony packages for 142 expert witness cases. Forged signature analysis with photographic evidence and 19 documented points of variance. GCM's ink composition data proving 2 different pens on the same document. Meredith's forensic accounting report with 3-year transaction timelines tracing $340,000 through 3 shell vendors. Darlene's independent records showing 18 months of financial irregularities. She'd been threatened into silence over. Drake's New Hampshire LLC filing exposing the secret finder's fee and the $140,000 discrepancy his own wife didn't know about. I arranged each document inside my worn leather briefcase, the same case I'd carried to the crime lab every morning for 15 years. Brass clasp darkened with age, my initials stamped near the latch. I closed it and set the catch. The brass clicked into place. The evidence was court-ready. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I came back on a Sunday. Same farmhouse, same cherrywood table, same chairs arranged around it. I'd called ahead, not to Vivian, to my Aunt Helen, to Paul, to Sophie, told them I needed the family together. Same room, same people who'd watched Vivian announce the sale over Thanksgiving turkey. Darlene came without being asked. She wore her church clothes and carried nothing. Her notebook was already in my briefcase. Vivian arrived last. Drake behind her, sport coat buttoned this time, jaw set. She scanned the room, saw Darlene, saw me at the far end of the table with the briefcase on the wood in front of me, and her mouth thinned. "What is this?" she asked. "Sit down," I said. My mother was in her chair at the head of the table. "Good day." She watched Vivian with eyes that tracked. Vivian sat. Drake dropped into the chair beside her, arms crossed. His Rolex caught the light from the window. I unlatched the brass clasp. The sound filled the room, the way it used to fill courtrooms. Small, mechanical, final. First document. I slid an enlarged photograph across the table. My actual signature from 3 separate sources beside the forgery from the transfer deed. Side by side, 8 by 10, 19 points of variance marked in red. The B has a hesitation mark at the top of the vertical stroke, I said. My voice came out flat, the same register I'd used on the witness stand for 15 years. My hand doesn't pause on that letter. The slant runs 12 degrees. Mine runs 7. The crossbar on the T-loops up. Mine has looped down since I was 16. Vivian's eyes went to Drake. He didn't look at her. Second document. The GCMS printout. 2 spectral profiles on a single page. The witness line was written with a standard commercial ballpoint. My forged signature was written with a premium roller pen, the kind you keep in your desk organizer at the distillery office. Different ink, different pen, different session. No reason for a property owner to sign with a different instrument than the witness who signed 3 lines above at the same sitting. Drake shifted in his chair. "This is a family discussion, Barrett." "Let's not." Third document. I placed Meredith's report on the table. 32 pages, tabbed and indexed. Meredith Okafor traced $340,000 in embezzled funds over 3 years. 3 shell vendor accounts. Green Mountain Barrel Supply. Northeast Grain Partners. Champlain Equipment Services. All registered to P.O. boxes. All paid through LLCS, linked to Drake's business filings. Vivian's chair scraped an inch backward. Those are legitimate suppliers that Barrett Darlene couldn't reach them by phone for 18 months. No deliveries. No verifiable addresses. I placed the blue spiral notebook on the table. Every entry dated, every discrepancy documented. 18 months of evidence she compiled while you threatened to fire her for asking questions. Darlene sat with her hands folded. She didn't look away from Vivian. Sophie sat at the far end, fingers wrapped around the arms of her chair. She hadn't looked at her mother since the first document hit the table. The room held no sound. My mother's hand rested on the table near mine. There's one more item. I pulled the last document from the briefcase. A New Hampshire LLC filing and a bank wire authorization. Drake negotiated a private finder's fee with Athenacrest for brokering the sale. $180,000. Drake's face went the color of old brick. Vivian, I set the page in front of her. You thought the fee was $40,000. Drake kept $140,000 for himself. Routed through an LLC registered under his cousin's name in New Hampshire. She turned to her husband. No hesitation. The same motion she'd used at every family dinner when the conversation turned against her. Her voice dropped, edges raw. You told me 40, she said. Keep your mouth shut, Drake said. The salesman was gone. His voice came out flat, stripped of everything. Both of you. This is a negotiation, not a trial. Barrett, name your price. Everybody walks away. Nobody's walking anywhere. I took out my phone, dialed a number I'd saved 3 days earlier, put it on speaker, and set it on the table. 2 rings. Rex Ashby. The voice was clipped, professional, Athenacrest's acquisitions director, the man who'd signed off on the deal Drake brokered. Mr. Ashby, this is Barrett Rourke, owner of Rourke Family Distillery. The property transfer and sale authorization, documents your team received, bear forged signatures. I have forensic proof, ink composition analysis, signature pressure comparisons, and a full accounting trace of $340,000 in embezzlement conducted by the individuals who brokered your deal. 3 seconds of silence. Send everything to my direct email, Ashby said. I'm freezing the acquisition effective now. Our legal team will cooperate with whatever investigation follows. Thank you. I ended the call. Drake was standing. He'd risen without sound, hands braced on the table, knuckles white against the cherry wood. His jaw worked, no sound. Sophie sat at the end of the table. She hadn't moved through any of it. Her eyes were on her father, on his hands, his face, the wire authorization with the $180,000 figure still sitting in front of her mother. I filed a complaint with the Vermont Attorney General's office on Friday, I said. Forgery, fraudulent property transfer, embezzlement, conspiracy, and elder exploitation, attempting to sell the home of a woman with diminished capacity without her informed consent. Vivian's face dropped. Not anger, not defiance. Her hands went flat on the table, eyes moving from the folder to the notebook to Darlene. No more words. The same expression I'd seen across this table on Thanksgiving morning when I opened the briefcase. But this time, the evidence was on the wood between us, and she couldn't talk her way past any of it. The difference was that now I understood it too. I closed the briefcase. The brass clasp clicked into place. The Attorney General's office moved within the month. 2 investigators from the Economic Crimes Unit drove to the distillery in mid-December, set a recorder on the tasting room bar, and spent 3 hours going through everything. The fraudulent signatures, the ink analysis, Meredith's forensic accounting trace, Darlene's spiral notebook with 18 months of entries. They photographed every page in the briefcase, bagged the original documents as evidence, and left with copies. By the week before Christmas, the state had opened a formal criminal investigation. A judge issued prejudgment attachment on the Cavils' assets. Their house in South Burlington, both vehicles, every bank account linked to their names or Drake's network of LLCs. All frozen. His Rolex. The diamond pendant Vivian bought herself after her first year of skimming distillery accounts. The sports memorabilia behind glass in Drake's home office, half of which were fakes. Then the subpoenas went out. 3 online gambling platforms. 2 casinos. The court ordered full disclosure of account activity for the past 5 years. Meredith called 3 weeks later on a Thursday evening. The court-ordered records came back, she said. The gambling losses, the casino trips, Sophie's college fund. All of it confirmed. Every dollar traceable back to the embezzlement. I set my glass on the counter, stared at the barrel rack across the room. I sat with that for 2 days. Sophie found me in the barn on a Tuesday afternoon. The stills were cold. I'd shut production down during the investigation. The copper had gone dull without the heat, and the barn smelled like oak and damp stone instead of grain mash. Backpack still on, car keys in her hand. She'd driven straight from school. "Is it true about the money?" she asked. "Which money?" "My college fund. Mom was screaming at Dad on the phone last night. Called him a thief. She didn't know I was in the hallway." I set down the hydrometer. "Sit down." She took the stool beside barrel 17, the same stool where she'd asked me about UVM's fermentation science program 6 months earlier. "Your father withdrew the funds over the past year," I said. "Gambling debts. There's $186 left." Her hands gripped the edge of the stool. She stared at the barrel rack behind me for what felt like a full minute. Her jaw tightened the same way mine does. "My father's jaw. The thing you do instead of breaking." "Both of them," she said. "Mom stealing from you. Dad stealing from me." "Yes." She picked up the hydrometer I'd set down, checked the specific gravity reading on the test batch, and wrote the number in the logbook. Her handwriting didn't waver. "I'm staying here," she said. Not a request. The interrogations broke them within hours. Meredith heard from contacts in the prosecutor's office and called me that same week. "They questioned them in separate rooms," she said. "Standard procedure." Vivian went first, and they laid out the corporate structure behind the 3 shell vendors. Every LLC was designed to insulate Drake. His name buried 3 levels deep. Vivian's name on every invoice, every payment authorization, every check. The investigator asked her who'd be left holding the paper trail when it all came apart. She stopped protecting Drake before he finished the question. What did she give them? Everything. Dates, amounts. Who approached Athenake arrest? Who coached her on copying your signature from old contracts in the office files? Drake tried to pin it all on Vivian. The vendors were her operation. The forgery was her hand. He was just a broker doing what brokers do. Meredith paused. They played him Vivian's recorded statement. He went gray, asked for a lawyer. That was the end of it. Charges came down in January. Vivian, felony forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy, elder exploitation, maximum on the forgery alone, 5 years. Drake, everything she faced, plus wire fraud with the cross-state payments through the New Hampshire LLC and the concealed finder's fee. Federal jurisdiction on the wire fraud. His attorney stopped returning calls from reporters by the second week. Word traveled through the craft spirits world before the Burlington Free Press ran the story. Distillers talked the way small-town people talk. Phone calls after dinner. Messages passed between people who build things with their hands. 6 producers across New England reached out in the first 2 weeks. 2 offered barrel storage at no charge while the investigation disrupted operations. A distiller from New Hampshire drove 3 hours on a Saturday morning, walked into the tasting room, set a bottle from his own reserve on the bar, and shook my hand. "Family shouldn't do that," he said. He left before I could pour him a glass. I set his bottle on the shelf next to barrel 17 and opened the tasting room at 7 the next morning. If you're feeling my revenge, hit like and drop a rating from 1 to 10 with your thoughts. I appreciate you. 6 months later, the stills were running again. Sophie graduated in June. I'd arranged a scholarship through the Vermont Craft Spirits Association. Tuition covered at UVM's fermentation science program, with a full apprenticeship at the distillery during breaks. She showed up on her first day in work boots and a leather apron she bought herself, the barn floor creaking under her steps, the same way it had under my father's. By August, she was managing her own test batches without supervision. My mother stayed in the farmhouse. Same kitchen window. Same view of the barn. Some days were good. Some days she called me by my father's name. On those days, I answered to it. The honey bourbon, barrel 17, infused with wildflower honey from my 4 hives, went to bottle in September. Limited release. 200 cases. Sold out in 11 days. Distributors who'd driven 2 hours for a tasting now called a week ahead to reserve allocations. The waiting list ran 3 pages. I checked the hives on a Saturday morning in October. Cool air, leaves turning, the bees working the last of the goldenrod before the frost shut everything down. I pulled a frame and held it to the light. Every cell filled, every hexagon capped with wax. I set the frame back in the hive and walked to the barn. The copper stills caught the morning light through the loft windows, warm against the old oak beams. The 11 acres had never left the family. The barn still held its weight. The farmhouse porch still faced the same tree line my grandfather had cleared in 1946. Vivian's trial was set for February. Drake's federal case would follow. Their names came up in the local paper twice. I turned the page both times. The prosecutor had every page that had once sat inside a worn leather briefcase with a brass clasp, and the evidence would speak for itself. My father was right about the locks. People who steal from family aren't stopped by them, but they are stopped by evidence. I closed the barn door behind me and went back to work.